slogans, and lots of people from the Socialist Party, as well as the Unison, which is the Public Service Union, the Communication Workers Union, the National Union of Teachers, and the University and Colleges Union, all represented here as well. Now, Andy Bentley is the Socialist Party's organiser for North Staffordshire. You've just been manning the stall, and I just want to drag you off it. What do you actually hope to achieve by protesting?
This is just part of a campaign which is taking place not just in Britain but across Europe, and it will grow in strength in the period ahead. We are quite determined to force the government to back down.
We're expecting to hear a lot today about pensions, lots today about possible cuts to services, lots today about possible job cuts. What are you, though, most worried about, and your colleagues who are in the unions over there?
We are very worried about the threat to jobs. It's already been estimated that if these cuts are carried out, up to 1 million jobs will be lost in Britain. Public services will be either cut or privatised, which will affect all of us. It'll have a serious knock-on effect as well in the private sector at the same time.
You understand, though, don't you, that the government's got a £155 billion deficit it has to deal with. It's going to have to cut that down somehow, so there's going to be pain for all of us, aren't there?
Well, I don't accept that there's going to be pain for all of us. For example, the richest 1,000 people last year increased their wealth by £77 billion, which now means collectively they have £344.5 billion. Surely they're not going to be affected too drastically by cuts which are being carried out.
Well,
it'll be the poor, it'll be ordinary working class people losing their jobs, job insecurity, which will be the real blow to the majority.
When that's levelled at the government, that criticism, they say that the better off will actually be paying more, and then they point out that the point at which people start paying tax will rise by £1,000, so that means nearly 900,000 people will be taking out the taxes, and that's good news for low earners, isn't it?
Well, those low earners, some of whom up to 1 million will lose their jobs, so it won't have any effect anyway. Secondly, based on the inflation figures, then they're still facing a pay cut.
Okay, just finally then, protests of the like we're seeing today, do you think we're going to see more of them over the coming months and years, as far as you're concerned at least?
These protests will continue. There will be a mass movement in Britain against the cuts which this government is attempting to impose against the wishes of the majority of the population.
Okay then, Paul. So as I mentioned, quite a small scale protest today. It's a very peaceful, sunny day at the moment in Hanley, but as you just heard, protests like this, in theory at least, will be getting more common as the effects of the budget bite.
Why have you come down here today for the protest?
Because the biggest danger I think we face is the apathy of the public until it's too late. Because what worries me most is not just apathy, but the shallow analysis. Nobody seems to be asking any questions about the real cause of this financial crisis and what the different solutions are that are available to us. We're just accepting what politicians are saying without question. And the danger is people will sleepwalk through this and pay a heavy price for it. It's absolutely clear that our government is going to try and privatise even more of public services, to cut back on public services, and to claim that by somehow privatising these services, they've changed the nature of the economy from the public sector to a more private economy with a greater proportion of private activity generating wealth. We all know the real outcome of that is that in the private sector, in small units, people have far less ability and capability to organise themselves collectively to negotiate with employers for decent terms and conditions, and that's got to be part of their strategy, which is to break down the power of ordinary working people to form together, to maintain and to negotiate and to improve their terms and conditions of work. And it's through that that millions of working class people, I think, are going to pay the price for this financial crisis by having their terms and conditions of employment attacked and undermined by a government that's going to change the nature of the economy from public sector works to the private sector. Massive danger, and people have got to be alert to that and be alerted to it.
The cuts which are going to be made are going to mainly are going to hugely affect young people and especially students. You know, there's going to be huge cuts to university funding. There's going to be potentially rises to fees. Then other young people are going to be thrown out on the scrap heap because, you know, first in, first out, that sort of nonsense.
I've come down today because I think it's important that we set a marker down that we're not going to accept these public sector cuts that the government's pushing through.
How will these cuts affect you?
How will they affect me? These cuts are going to affect me possibly quite personally because I am employed by the NHS. They're saying that they're possibly going to ring-fence NHS spending, which means if there's an increase in inflation, it's going to result in a cut in NHS spending, which is going to be disastrous not just for me as an employee of the NHS, but for everybody who uses the NHS as a service user.
I think one of the things that we need to consider is that the previous government, even though they spent a lot on public services, underneath that there was Conservative Party policies surrounding public-private partnerships and PFIs that privatised vast tracts of our public services. And as they've done that, it's created inefficiencies and destroyed the economies of scale that used to make public services affordable. So now we're faced with unaffordable public services due to privatisation, and this government's answer to that is more privatisation, more the medicine that's got us in this situation in the first place will be rammed down our throats. And we need to resist, as working class people, as trade unionists, the cuts that are coming, and propose an alternative that is to build the public sector and build public ownership so that we can have efficiencies and economies of scale and services that act for the benefit of people. The other thing is we've let go of our financial services. We have no control over our financial services. The lunacy of this is a lot of this debt is debt that's bailed out the banks, who are now speculating against the public sector. Now the government gilts are worth less and they're not being sold, which is fueling the debt crisis. Well, that debt has bailed out the bankers. We need control of our finances, and part of that should be the nationalisation of certain sectors of our banking system, and we can start with the banks that are already under national ownership: Northern Rock, Lloyds TSB and RBS.
And what we've got to do, Camille, you're absolutely right, is fundamentally counter this argument that somehow or other public service is bad for the economy and not efficient. We've absolutely got to challenge that premise. We all rely on public services: the police, the health service, the education service, care services. They're the bedrock of our society. And what these politicians are doing when they're attacking public services is attacking the concept of a civilised society. And that's the argument that we've got to get across to people. And to counter and reject this argument that somehow or other the public sector's got to pay the price for this economic disaster.